History is full of fallen kings and forgotten empires, but what if their true conqueror was the sky itself? Historian Fern and Braudel called Civilization a story of man against climate, and he was right. This journey uncovers the hidden force behind the rise and fall of empires, a force with stark warnings for our own world. You will discover how a sudden drought can starve an army more effectively than any siege, and how a volcanic eruption can rewrite the map of human power. We will see how the mighty Akkadian Empire vanished into dust, and why the Vikings' golden age was built on a warm sea that later turned against them. What forgotten story of a lost civilization makes you wonder what really happened? A sudden climate shift is a shock to the system. We are not talking about the slow creep of glaciers or the imperceptible warming over centuries. We mean a drastic change that unfolds within a single generation, a violent lurch in the planetary engine that upends the basic rules of life. Picture a volcanic eruption so colossal it spews a sun-blocking veil of ash across the globe, triggering years of freezing summers and failed harvests. Or envision a mega-drought, a 20-year stretch where the rains simply never come, turning bread baskets into barren wastelands. For an agricultural society, these are not mere inconveniences. They are existential threats. The food surplus that feeds cities, pays soldiers, and funds grand projects evaporates. Trade routes dependent on predictable harvests wither and die. The social contract, the unspoken agreement between the rulers and the ruled, shatters when the state can no longer guarantee the most fundamental need, a full belly. This is the climatic trigger, the hidden force that can topple a throne without a single enemy soldier at the gates. To witness its raw, destructive power, we must journey to the ancient world and the mysterious collapse of the Akkadian Empire. The world's first empire was undone by the very dust it once ruled. In the distant reaches of the Gulf of Oman, deep within sediment cores, scientists uncovered a stark geological truth. A layer of ancient dust carried on relentless winds marks the precise moment the Akkadian Empire began to crumble. This was not a passing dry spell. It was a merciless, centuries-long drought that paleoclimatologists call a mega-drought. At the heart of the empire in northern Mesopotamia, the city of Tel Leilan tells a silent story. Its streets and buildings were suddenly abandoned, buried by the accumulating dust of a failed climate. The Akkadian state, a masterpiece of centralized power, was built on a foundation of grain. Its armies were fed by taxes collected from fertile fields. When the rains vanished for generations, that foundation turned to powder. Famine spread like a plague. Social order dissolved into desperate unrest as people fled the desiccated heartland. The imperial bureaucracy, designed to manage plenty, had no answer for absolute scarcity. Its authority simply disintegrated. The collapse of the Akkadian Empire stands as a terrifying lesson. The most sophisticated human power structures can be rendered utterly fragile by a shift in the weather. Yet if a changing climate could dismantle an empire, could it also build one? The next chapter of this story reveals an astonishing twist, where a great flood of ice and water gave birth to a legendary civilization. While the pyramids of Giza stand as eternal monuments to the power of the Egyptian Old Kingdom, their builders could not foresee a time when the very rhythm of life would fail. Around 2200 BCE, that power crumbled, leading to a century of chaos known as the First Intermediate Period. The trigger was a catastrophic failure of the Nile's annual flood. Ice core data from Greenland and sediment cores from the Nile Delta reveal a prolonged period of sharply reduced precipitation at the river's distant headwaters. The life-giving inundation which deposited fertile silt across the farmlands simply did not arrive. An ancient text known as the Admonitions of Ipuwer laments this very collapse, stating, "The river is blood and all is ruin." This was more than an ecological disaster, it was a theological catastrophe. The Pharaoh was not just a king, he was a god on earth, personally responsible for ensuring the Nile's annual bounty. When the flood failed for generations, he lost his divine mandate in the eyes of his people. With no flood, there were no crops. With no crops, there was no tax revenue to feed the vast army of priests, scribes, and laborers that formed the state's backbone. The grand building project ceased. Provincial governors, seeing the central government's power evaporate, broke away to rule their own domains. The unified kingdom shattered into competing factions, and central authority vanished for over a century. This story demonstrates that a climate shock tests not just a state's material resources, but its very soul, the foundational ideology that holds it together. Now, let's cross the sea to a civilization whose dramatic downfall is wrapped in both enduring myth and startling climate data. The vibrant frescoes of Knossos depict a world of grace and movement, a civilization seemingly at peace with itself and the sea. Yet the Minoan's final act was written in fire and water. Far to the north, the island of Thera, a bustling Minoan outpost, was a geological time bomb. When it detonated around 1600 BCE, the eruption was so colossal it makes modern volcanoes look like mere firecrackers. The explosion tore the island apart, sending a cubic mile of rock and ash into the stratosphere. This was the first blow, a volcanic winter. A suffocating blanket of ash fell across the region, and a sun-blocking haze of sulfuric acid droplets circled the globe, plunging temperatures for years. Crops on Crete would have failed under the dim, cold skies, but the second, more immediate blow came from the sea. The collapse of Thera's central cone into the empty magma chamber triggered a tsunami of almost unimaginable scale. Waves estimated to be over 100 feet high radiated outward, slamming into the northern coast of Crete just 70 miles away. The Minoan fleet, the source of their maritime empire and their wealth, was likely smashed to splinters in its home ports. Their coastal administrative centers were scoured from the map. In a single day, the Minoans lost their navy, their trade network, and their primary coastal infrastructure. They were not wiped out, but they were critically weakened, their sophisticated society brought to its knees. Within a few generations, they were no longer the masters of their own destiny. The more militaristic Mycenaeans from the Greek mainland, who had long been influenced by Minoan culture, saw their opportunity and moved in. A single geological event did not just topple a palace, it erased a dominant power and handed the keys of the ancient world to a new one, proving that the climate can indeed reset the entire board of human history. And as we will see, this pattern of rise and fall dictated by the environment was not confined to the old world. A similar drama, driven by a relentless and shifting rain pattern, was unfolding in the heart of the Americas. Deep in the humid jungles of Central America, the silence of a limestone cave holds a secret written in stone. Stalagmites, growing slowly from the cave floor over centuries, captured the ancient rainfall in their mineral layers. Their chemical composition reveals a devastating truth. Just as the classic Maya civilization reached its zenith around 800 CE, with its grand plazas and towering temples, the rains began to fail. The data shows not one, but a series of brutal, multi-decade megadroughts striking the Maya heartland precisely during the century of their collapse. For a society built entirely on maize agriculture, this was a death sentence. Imagine the reservoirs, the intricate systems of canals and stored water, slowly evaporating under a relentless sun. The maize fields, the very foundation of Maya life, would have withered in the dust. This environmental catastrophe struck at the heart of Maya political power. The Maya king was not just a ruler, he was a shaman king, the vital link between the people and the gods. His most sacred duty was to perform rituals that guaranteed the arrival of the life-giving rains. When the skies remained empty year after year, his power evaporated along with the water. His divine mandate was broken. What use was a rainmaker who could not make it rain? The social contract shattered. The populace, facing starvation and thirst, lost faith in the entire political and religious hierarchy. The grand ceremonial centers, once the vibrant hearts of city-states, were not destroyed by invaders. They were simply abandoned. People dispersed from the great cities, retreating into smaller, scattered villages in a desperate search for reliable water sources. The intricate network of alliances and rivalries between city-states, a system that had fueled magnificent cultural achievements, could not withstand the overwhelming pressure of absolute scarcity. The collapse of the Maya is a sobering lesson in the vulnerability of even the most brilliant and complex societies when their fundamental environmental support system fails. Yet if a changing climate could so ruthlessly dismantle one civilization, could it also offer a golden ticket to another? A remarkable story from the frozen north suggests that sometimes a warmer world can create entirely new empires. While the Maya faced collapse under a merciless sun, another civilization was flourishing under a remarkably benevolent sky. The rise of Rome from a regional republic to a sprawling empire was underwritten by a climatic golden age. For roughly 650 years, from 250 BCE to 400 CE, the Mediterranean world enjoyed what scientists call the Roman climatic optimum. This was an era of unusually warm, wet, and stable weather, a fact etched into the growth rings of ancient trees and the layers of alpine glaciers. This favorable climate was not a mere backdrop, it was a silent, powerful partner in Rome's imperial project. Consistent, abundant rains and longer growing seasons translated directly into agricultural superabundance. Farms across Italy, Gaul, and North Africa produced bumper crops year after year. This surplus was the empire's lifeblood. It fed a booming population, providing the steady stream of young men who filled the legions. It generated the immense tax revenues that paid for those soldiers' equipment, their famous roads, and their formidable fleets. Most visibly, this agricultural windfall fueled the Annona, the state-subsidized grain dole that fed the million-strong populace of the city of Rome itself, ensuring social stability at the very heart of the empire. The warm climate even reshaped the empire's geography, making the formidable Alps a more passable barrier for trade and military campaigns. Meanwhile, the provinces of North Africa, once arid, bloomed into the empire's indispensable breadbasket, their fields of grain stretching to the horizon. This period demonstrates a profound truth. A stable and favorable climate can provide the perfect foundation for imperial ambition, turning human potential into unprecedented power. But this golden age, built on such a fortunate alignment with the environment, was destined to be temporary. The very forces that blessed Rome would one day turn against it. Rome's golden age of plenty could not last forever. The gears of the planetary engine began to shift, and by the 3rd century CE, the Roman climatic optimum was fading into history. The stable, warm, and wet weather that had fueled the empire's rise gave way to a new era of cooler, more unpredictable conditions. This was not a single catastrophic event like a volcanic eruption, but a slow, grinding change that acted as a relentless stress multiplier on a society already under immense pressure. Imagine the imperial administration, a vast and complex machine built for expansion and control, suddenly having to cope with repeated crop failures across its provinces. The tax revenues dependent on agricultural surplus began to dry up just as the empire needed more money than ever to pay its armies and fortify its borders against increasing barbarian incursions. Food shortages sparked social unrest and made it difficult to feed the legions, the very foundation of Roman power. Then came the Antonine Plague, a devastating outbreak believed to be smallpox. It swept through a population whose resilience was already compromised by nutritional stress and the movement of armies, killing millions and crippling the labor force. The empire, stretched too thin and starved of its economic and human resources, shattered. For 50 years, it was not one empire but three, torn apart by civil war, economic collapse, and foreign invasion. This period reveals a crucial distinction in how climate shapes history. It does not always deliver a dramatic, final blow. Sometimes it simply weakens a society, eroding its foundations until a crisis it might have survived instead becomes a mortal wound. The resilient empire of the 2nd century had become a fragile one by the 3rd, and as Rome's fortunes waned under a cooling sky, a very different empire was preparing to ride a wave of climate-driven opportunity. As Europe shivered through its migration period, the deserts of Arabia were experiencing a different fate. A subtle shift towards warmer and wetter conditions transformed the peninsula, turning marginal lands into viable farmland. This environmental change set the stage for one of history's most dramatic political and cultural expansions. Following the death of the Prophet Muhammad, the Islamic Caliphates exploded out of Arabia, conquering territories from Spain to the borders of India in less than a century. Their stunning speed was powered by more than faith and military genius. It was fueled by an agricultural windfall. Historians call this the Arab agricultural revolution. The improved climate allowed for the cultivation of new, high-yield crops like sorghum, rice, and citrus fruits, introduced from the vast trading networks the Caliphates now controlled. This was not just more food, it was a dietary and economic transformation. Irrigation systems flourished, population soared, and a surplus of wealth poured into the burgeoning cities of Baghdad and Damascus. This economic boom provided the material foundation for the Caliphate's immense armies and their legendary cultural golden age. The climate did not create the new faith, but it provided the fertile ground from which a world-changing empire could sprout and thrive. It is a powerful lesson in global dynamics. One region's climate misfortune can be the very engine for another's ascendancy. While the Caliphates flourished under a warmer sky, a deep chill was settling over the opposite end of the Eurasian landmass, with consequences that would ripple across a continent. The story of the Mongol horde is often written in blood and conquest, yet its true origins lie in the grass. For centuries, the vast Mongolian steppe was a harsh and unforgiving landscape where rival tribes fought over scarce pasture for their herds. Then the climate shifted. A remarkable study of ancient tree rings reveals a profound change, a period of sustained warmth and wetness that swept across the plains from 1211 to 1225. This was not a minor change in the weather. It was a transformation of the land itself. The normally arid grasslands exploded into a sea of lush, nutritious forage. For a nomadic, pastoral society, this was an economic miracle. Herds of horses, sheep, and cattle grew exponentially, their numbers swelling with the abundance. And for the Mongols, horses were not just wealth, they were the very instrument of power. Each warrior required a string of multiple mounts to maintain his relentless mobility. This climate-driven bounty, this pluvial period, provided the essential fuel for the military machine that would conquer the world. With their herds thriving, the tribes could support a vastly larger population of warriors and their indispensable animals. The chronicles of the Mongols themselves speak of this time as one of unprecedented abundance, a golden age on the steppe. It was upon this wave of ecological good fortune that a young Temujin rose, uniting the fractious tribes under his singular vision to become Genghis Khan. The resource base that had once been a source of conflict was now a platform for unity and expansion. The Mongol cavalry did not just appear from nowhere. It was built on the back of a temporary climate anomaly that supercharged their entire way of life. Their conquests demonstrate a powerful truth. Even the most formidable nomadic empires were inextricably linked to the cycles of their environment. But as the lush green of the steppe inevitably began to fade, a deep and lasting chill was already gripping a continent far to the west. The 17th century dawned under a cold and unforgiving sun. Across the northern hemisphere, the Little Ice Age tightened its grip, bringing with it a global stress test of unprecedented scale. Glaciers began a slow, grinding advance, swallowing alpine pastures. The River Thames in London froze solid so often that frost fairs became a regular spectacle on its icy surface. Most critically, the growing seasons across Europe shortened dramatically. A late spring frost or an early autumn snowfall could now doom an entire year's harvest. This was not a single bad winter, but a relentless, multi-generational siege of cold and climatic chaos. The result was a cascade of agricultural disaster. Harvests failed repeatedly, grain prices soared to unimaginable levels, and famine stalked the land. This widespread misery created a tinderbox of social desperation. Historian Jeffrey Parker, in his sweeping study Global Crisis, argues that this climatic stress did not invent the conflicts of the era, but it lit the fuse on a powder keg of existing political and religious tensions. In England, food shortages and popular anger over taxes fueled the fires of the Civil War, which would see a king executed. In France, a bankrupt monarchy's attempts to raise revenue, combined with desperate hunger, sparked the aristocratic and popular revolts known as the Fronde. The impact was truly global, with the same climatic pressures contributing to the dramatic collapse of the mighty Ming dynasty in China, as famine and peasant rebellion overwhelmed the state. This period reveals a crucial distinction in how societies respond to climate stress. The Dutch Republic, with its innovative financial systems and global trade networks that could import grain from the Baltic, weathered the storm with remarkable resilience. In contrast, the more rigid Spanish monarchy, overstretched and financially brittle, was pushed repeatedly to the brink of collapse. The Little Ice Age did not dictate a single outcome, but it ruthlessly exposed which states were flexible enough to adapt and which were destined to fracture. This global chill did not just reshape nations, however. It set the stage for one of history's most haunting and intimate tragedies. The price of bread became the true measure of a king's legitimacy. In the spring of 1788, a freak hailstorm of almost biblical proportions swept across northern France. Stones the size of fists pummeled the ripening wheat fields, reducing the crucial harvest to a sodden ruin. This was not an isolated disaster. It was the final, brutal blow in a series of poor harvests driven by the lingering chill of the Little Ice Age. The result was a catastrophic grain shortage. By the following winter, the cost of a simple loaf of bread in Paris consumed nearly 90% of a laborer's daily wage. For the masses, this was not an economic statistic, it was starvation. The famous, though likely fictional, retort of "let them eat cake" perfectly encapsulated the aristocracy's profound detachment from this visceral suffering. The streets of Paris simmered with a new kind of fury, one born not of abstract political ideals, but of the primal, gnawing hunger in a child's belly. When the women of Paris marched on Versailles in October 1789, they were not chanting for liberty or fraternity. Their central demand was for bread. The monarchy, with its vast bureaucracy and ancient authority, proved utterly incapable of managing this basic crisis. Its failure to keep the people fed shattered the last vestiges of its divine right to rule more decisively than any philosophical treatise. The storming of the Bastille was a political symbol, but the March for Bread was the revolution's beating heart. It demonstrates with terrifying clarity how a climate shock can travel directly from a battered wheat field to the steps of a guillotine. Yet, as France descended into revolutionary chaos, an empire on the other side of the world was discovering that the very same global cooling could be a source of unprecedented power. Their longships struck terror into the hearts of coastal Europe, yet the Vikings were masters of a climate they did not control. The great age of their expansion was fueled by a planetary gift known as the medieval warm period. For roughly 3 centuries, from the 8th to the 10th, the North Atlantic grew remarkably mild, glaciers retreated, and the treacherous sea ice that had long barred passage through northern waters largely vanished. This was not merely a convenience, it was a geographical revolution. The warmer, calmer seas transformed the Viking longship from a raiding vessel into a vehicle of colonization, opening a watery highway to lands once beyond reach. They settled Iceland, turning its once marginal pastures into a thriving society. They pushed further west, establishing 2 sizable settlements on the southwestern coast of Greenland, a place they deceptively named for its fleeting fertility. For a time, these outposts flourished, their economies built on a mix of hardy cattle farming and the lucrative trade in walrus ivory, which was as valuable as gold in medieval Europe. The Vikings had successfully expanded into an ecological niche that a warmer world had created for them. But that world was already changing. The onset of the Little Ice Age began to strangle the very lifelines that sustained their farthest colonies. As the global chill deepened, the sea ice returned with a vengeance, creeping further south each year and isolating the Greenland settlements for months, sometimes years on end. The growing seasons on Greenland shortened dramatically, making it nearly impossible to sustain the hay crops needed to overwinter livestock. The Norse were trapped between a frozen sea and a frozen land. Their stories, the Icelandic sagas, preserve a haunting memory of this decline in the concept of Fimbulwinter, a great and endless winter that heralds the apocalypse. This was more than myth, it was a lived reality. The last documented ship to reach the eastern settlement in Greenland arrived in the early 1400s, finding only abandoned farms and silence. The Vikings, who had ridden a wave of warmth to global significance, became victims of the cold, their westernmost empire slowly erased by the closing of their climatic window. They exemplify a profound pattern. Societies often expand into ecological niches that are temporary, and when the climate changes, those frontiers can become fatal traps. This drama of expansion and retreat was not unique to the Atlantic, as a great indigenous civilization in North America would soon discover. High on the sun-baked mesas of the American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans carved entire cities into the faces of sheer cliffs. These were not temporary shelters, but sophisticated, multi-story dwellings built to last, connected by a network of handholds and ladders that reached towards the sky. For generations, their society flourished in this starkly beautiful landscape, mastering the art of dry land farming. Then, around 1276, the rain simply stopped. Tree rings from ancient pines tell a story of a relentless, 23-year stretch of profound aridity known as the Great Drought. For a civilization entirely dependent on maize, a crop that demands just the right amount of summer rain, this was a catastrophe in slow motion. Their carefully tended fields perched on mesa tops would have baked into useless clay. The intricate systems of check dams and reservoirs they built to capture every precious drop of runoff slowly emptied, leaving behind only dust and despair. This was not a sudden, dramatic collapse, but a grinding, generational struggle against a drying world. The environmental stress did not create new problems, but it amplified every existing social fracture. In a land of plenty, sharing resources is a virtue. In a land of absolute scarcity, it becomes a matter of life and death. Competition over the last reliable springs and the dwindling harvests likely turned neighbor against neighbor. The very architecture of their cliff dwellings, so easily defensible, hints at a world growing more dangerous and inward-looking. The large, communal Great Kivas, once the center of religious and social life, fell into disuse, a silent testament to the breakdown of a shared identity. The solution was not to die, but to leave. The ancestral Puebloans did not vanish from the earth. They made a conscious, collective choice to abandon their magnificent stone cities and migrate south and east towards the life-giving waters of the Rio Grande and the Little Colorado River. Their story is one of profound resilience, a strategic retreat from a homeland that could no longer support them. They traded their towering cliff houses for a future, dispersing into smaller communities that would eventually become the modern Pueblo peoples. This was not a failure, but a difficult, successful adaptation to an insurmountable climatic challenge. It forces us to ask, what does a society choose to carry with it when it must leave almost everything behind? This question of total collapse echoes even more mysteriously in the ruins of a tropical empire, whose great cities were swallowed by the jungle so completely that their very memory was erased for centuries. The great cities of the Indus Valley were marvels of ancient urban planning, with straight streets and advanced drainage systems rivaling those of Egypt and Mesopotamia. Yet their ultimate fate was not written in stone, but in the shifting paths of water. Around 1900 BCE, this vast civilization, which had thrived for centuries, began a slow but unmistakable decline. Its bustling metropolitan centers like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were gradually abandoned, their sophisticated civic life fading into silence. While historians have long debated the reasons, a compelling answer is now emerging from the very soil and from space. Geological evidence points to a profound climatic shift. The monsoons that had reliably fed the lifeblood of the region, the Indus River and its network of tributaries, began to drift eastward over generations. This was not a sudden drought, but a slow-motion environmental catastrophe. Some rivers simply dwindled to trickles and then vanished into the sand. Others, most notably the massive Gaga-Hakra river system described in later Vedic texts, dramatically changed their courses, abandoning the cities that depended on them. Satellite imagery has starkly revealed the truth, tracing the ghostly, dry scars of these lost riverbeds snaking through the landscape, far from the settlements they once sustained. Imagine the slow, dawning horror for the inhabitants as their canals ran dry and their irrigated fields turned to dust. The entire economic and social structure of the Indus Valley civilization was built on an agricultural surplus made possible by this reliable water. When that foundation eroded, the complex organization required to run a city, from tax collection to communal grain storage, became impossible to maintain. There is no evidence of a single, violent invasion. Instead, the civilization seems to have simply unraveled. People did not die out, they voted with their feet, dispersing from the grand, dying cities into smaller, more sustainable rural villages. The Indus script remains undeciphered, so we cannot hear their story in their own words, but the silent testimony of the land tells us everything we need to know. A civilization that mastered city building could not master the rivers, and when those rivers chose to wander, they took an entire world with them. This profound dependence on a stable environment brings our story into a terrifyingly modern context, where the climatic forces that shaped antiquity are now awakening once again. The skies over the Great Plains turned black with the very earth that had once promised prosperity. During the 1930s, a perfect storm of climatic misfortune and human error unfolded across the American heartland. A severe multi-year drought, a natural climate shift, parched the land, but this dryness alone was not the true disaster. It was the collision of this drought with decades of deep plowing that had torn up the native, drought-resistant prairie grasses. Without those deep roots to hold it in place, the topsoil had nothing to anchor it. When the winds came, they lifted the desiccated earth into the air, creating colossal dust storms that blotted out the sun for days. These were not mere sandstorms, they were moving mountains of dirt, suffocating farms and burying homes. This was the Dust Bowl, an ecological catastrophe on a scale the nation had never seen. Millions of acres of farmland became a barren wasteland, forcing hundreds of thousands of people, known as Okkies, to abandon their homes in a desperate mass migration to California. John Steinbeck's novel The Grapes of Wrath immortalized this exodus, capturing the profound human suffering and the near breaking of the American spirit during the already crushing Great Depression. The event proved that even a modern, industrializing nation with all its technology remained terrifyingly vulnerable to the disruption of its food systems by climatic instability. In response, the federal government initiated a new era of environmental management, creating agencies like the Soil Conservation Service to teach farmers methods to prevent such a disaster from ever happening again. The Dust Bowl stands as a stark 20th century lesson, a direct echo of ancient megadroughts, reminding us that the relationship between climate and society is never a settled matter. We now live in an age of unprecedented data, where the lessons of the past are illuminated by the cold, hard light of modern science. These silent archives are not kept in libraries, but locked within the deepest ice and the oldest trees. The story of past climates is a puzzle with most of the pieces missing because thermometers are a very recent invention. To understand the world of the Akkadians or the Maya, we must become detectives, reading the clues they left behind in the natural world. This is the science of paleoclimatology, the art of reconstructing ancient weather. Its most powerful tools are cores, long cylinders of ice or mud extracted from the planet's most pristine places. In the immense ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica, scientists drill down, retrieving cores that are frozen timelines. Each annual layer of snowfall, compressed into ice, traps tiny bubbles of the atmosphere as it was centuries ago. By analyzing the chemistry of that ancient air, researchers can measure past levels of carbon dioxide and methane, and even determine the precise temperature of the world when that snow fell. It is like opening a time capsule sealed by nature itself. Similarly, sediment cores pulled from the bottoms of lakes and oceans act as slow-motion history books. Layer by layer, they accumulate pollen from long-vanished forests, microscopic fossils of creatures that thrived in specific water temperatures, and chemical isotopes that shift with the climate. A single core can contain thousands of years of environmental change, a silent witness to the rise and fall of empires it never knew. On land, the humble tree holds a precise diary. The science of dendrochronology reads the story in tree rings. A wide, light-colored ring signals a year of abundant rain and vigorous growth. A series of narrow, dark rings tells a tale of relentless drought and hardship. By comparing patterns from living trees with ancient logs and even fossilized wood, scientists can build a continuous chronology of climate conditions stretching back thousands of years, pinpointing dry spells with astonishing accuracy. Even the slow, steady drip of water in a cave becomes a data point. Stalagmites rising from cave floors accumulate in layers that can be precisely dated. The chemical composition of each layer varies with the amount of rainfall that seeped through the rock above, creating a mineral record of ancient downpours and parched epochs. It was the convergence of these diverse proxies, ice cores, tree rings, and sediment layers that allowed scientist Michael Mann to create his famous hockey stick graph. This reconstruction showed the long, relatively stable handle of natural temperature variations over the last millennium, followed by the sharp, unprecedented blade of warming that shoots upward with the industrial burning of fossil fuels. This is the same scientific detective work that connects a specific layer of dust in the Gulf of Oman to the Akkadian collapse, or a sequence of dry years encoded in a Mayan cave formation to the abandonment of great cities. These methods transform myth into measurable fact. They give us the evidence to see the invisible hand of climate shaping human destiny. With this foundation of hard-won data, we can now confront the most challenging question of all, one that forces us to reconsider the very nature of history itself. For centuries, the grand narrative of history was dominated by the deeds of kings and the strategies of conquerors. This great man theory placed the weight of the world on the shoulders of a few extraordinary individuals. But the silent testimony of ice cores and tree rings forces a profound revision of that story. Yes, a leader's charisma or a general's cunning can win a battle, but no pharaoh, no matter how brilliant or divinely appointed, could command the Nile to rise. No Maya lord, with all his esoteric knowledge, could conjure rain from a bone-dry sky. Human ambition has always been bounded by the non-negotiable realities of the environment. This is not to say that people are mere puppets of the weather. Historians like Ian Morris, in his work Why the West Rules for Now, articulate a more nuanced view, one where environmental forces set the stage and define the limits of what is possible. Human agency then writes the script within those constraints. A period of climatic bounty, like the Roman Optimum, creates a wide stage for ambition, allowing empires to flourish. A sudden shift, like the Mega-Drought that starved the Akkadians, shrinks that stage dramatically, making even the most sophisticated society fragile. This perspective does not diminish human achievement, but rather frames it in a more honest and dramatic light. It reveals that our greatest triumphs often occur when our ingenuity aligns with a favorable world, and our most devastating collapses happen when that world suddenly changes the rules. It teaches us that historical collapse is rarely a simple story of bad leadership or foreign invasion. It is almost always a cascade, a confluence of social, political, and environmental pressures, where a changing climate acts as the ultimate stress test, exposing every hidden weakness in a society's foundations. So, what does this broader view teach the leaders of today about building a resilient society? Resilience in the face of a changing climate is not a modern invention. While many empires shattered, others found ways to bend without breaking. The Byzantine Empire, for instance, inherited the eastern half of the Roman world just as the western half was fragmenting under pressure. A key to their remarkable longevity, which spanned another 1,000 years, was their capacity to adapt their economy. When the old Roman grain supplies from North Africa and Egypt became less reliable or were lost to conquest, the Byzantines did not simply try to reclaim them at all costs. Instead, they pivoted. They shifted their agricultural focus towards new, hardier crops and intensified production in Anatolia and the Balkans. Their administrative system was also less rigid, allowing provincial governors more flexibility to respond to local crises like a bad harvest or an invasion without waiting for orders from a distant, centralized bureaucracy. This decentralized resilience meant a shock in one region did not necessarily paralyze the entire state. On the other side of the world, the Inca Empire demonstrated a different kind of mastery over their environment. In the vertiginous Andes, where water could either be a lifeline or a destructive torrent, the Inca engineered a landscape of resilience. They sculpted entire mountainsides into vast, steppe terraces that prevented soil erosion and created microclimates for different crops. Their sophisticated canal and aqueduct systems captured mountain runoff, storing and distributing water with a precision that would be impressive even today. This was not just farming, it was a form of calculated environmental buffering. A few years of unusual weather would not automatically lead to famine because their systems were designed for variability. In both these cases, the common thread is not overwhelming power but supple flexibility. The most vulnerable societies were often the most spectacular, the ones built on a single, monolithic foundation, whether it was Egyptian pharaohs reliant on the Nile's perfect flood or Maya kings whose divine power was tied exclusively to bringing rain. When that one pillar was shaken, the entire structure came down. Resilience, then, seems to come from a society's ability to diversify its bets, to have multiple food sources, redundant trade routes, and a political system that can respond to local realities. It is the difference between a mighty oak that snaps in a storm and a willow that bends and survives. This ancient lesson speaks directly to our own world, where building resilience is less about fortifying our current systems and more about making them agile and distributed. Yet this capacity for adaptation has its limits, and when those limits are breached, the social fabric can tear in the most violent ways. A silent, empty granary can be more dangerous than a foreign army. When the fundamental resources for life begin to vanish, the social contract that holds a civilization together often shreds, revealing a darker, more desperate human nature. Climate-induced scarcity rarely leads to a quiet, peaceful decline. Instead, it becomes a potent accelerant for conflict, turning neighbor against neighbor and fueling mass migrations that can topple entire regions. The mysterious sea peoples who ravaged the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BCE were long seen as a simple barbarian horde, but modern evidence suggests they were likely climate refugees, driven from their homelands in the Aegean and Anatolia by widespread drought and crop failure. They did not sail to conquer but to survive, and their desperate search for new land became an existential crisis for the mighty Hittite Empire and a severe test for Egypt. This pattern of scarcity breeding violence is etched into the archaeological record with chilling clarity. In the pre-Columbian American Southwest, at sites like Cowboy Wash in Colorado, scientists discovered human bones bearing the unmistakable marks of butchering and cooking. This grisly evidence, dating to the same period as the Great Drought that afflicted the ancestral Puebloans, points to a society pushed to the brink, where the unthinkable became a reality under the strain of starvation. The modern world is not immune to this ancient script. The Syrian civil war, a complex geopolitical tragedy, had a powerful climatic prologue. From 1998 to 2012, the country endured the worst multi-year drought in its recorded history. Crops failed completely, and herders lost 85% of their livestock. Over 1.5 million people, mostly farmers and their families, were forced to abandon their land and cram into overcrowded cities like Damascus and Aleppo. These displaced communities became a tinderbox of unemployment, resentment, and social friction. creating fertile ground for unrest and extremism. Climate change did not single-handedly cause the war, but it acted as a devastating threat multiplier, amplifying every existing political and economic grievance until the society fractured. When water and food become scarce, the world shrinks to a brutal competition for survival, and the idea of a common good evaporates faster than the last puddle in a dry riverbed. This grim historical reality forces a difficult question. If a changing climate can so effectively sow the seeds of war, has it ever, against all odds, cultivated the conditions for peace? A desperate struggle for survival does not always end in violence. Sometimes the sheer scale of a shared crisis can forge a new kind of unity, compelling rivals to become partners. The ancient Egyptian state itself may have been born from this very impulse. Long before the pyramids, the communities scattered along the Nile faced a common, formidable challenge: an unpredictable river whose life-giving floods could either be too weak to water their fields or too strong and sweep everything away. To survive and thrive, they had to learn to cooperate on a massive scale. Building and maintaining the vast networks of canals, dikes, and basins required for large-scale irrigation was not a task for a single village. It demanded a centralized authority, one that could organize thousands of laborers, manage resources, and settle disputes over water rights. The need to collectively tame the river's chaos likely provided the catalyst for the world's first territorial state, transforming local chieftains into pharaohs with the divine mandate to control the waters. This was a social contract written in mud and water, a recognition that their individual fates were inextricably linked to the river and to each other. Centuries later and far to the north, a similar story of cooperation may have unfolded in the wake of the Pharaoh eruption. While the Minoan civilization was critically weakened, its people did not simply vanish. Archaeological evidence suggests that some survivors, carrying their advanced knowledge of seafaring, art, and architecture, integrated with the rising Mycenaean culture on the Greek mainland. This was not a conquest but a form of cultural fusion where Minoan technologies and ideas were absorbed and adapted, ultimately strengthening the Mycenaean world that would follow. This pattern of unification in the face of a common threat echoes even in our modern, fractured world. The existential danger of global warming has compelled nearly every nation on Earth to come to the table, resulting in international agreements like the Paris Accord. However fragile and imperfect, it represents a collective, global acknowledgement of a shared problem that transcends borders. These examples reveal a crucial truth: the human response to environmental crisis is not preordained. The same scarcity that can ignite a war can also inspire a treaty. The same floodwaters that could drown a village when managed together can water an entire civilization. The choice between building bridges and building walls when resources grow thin is one of the most defining challenges of any era, and it is a choice we are actively making right now. This historical duality of climate as both a ruthless divider and a potential unifier brings us to the final and most urgent application of these ancient lessons: our own future. Our current planetary crisis carries a terrible irony. For the first time, the great climate shift is not a natural event but a human-made one. The rapid warming driven by our greenhouse gas emissions is a challenge of a different magnitude, a test for a civilization that spans the entire globe. This interconnected world of ours is the largest and most complex empire ever to exist, and the ancient lessons are echoing with unnerving clarity. Rising sea levels today do not merely threaten a few coastal villages, they jeopardize the immense megacities and vital infrastructure where billions live and work. A slow-motion version of the sea level changes that drowned ancient settlements. Our modern breadbaskets, the vast agricultural zones from the American Midwest to the plains of Punjab, are just as vulnerable to shifting precipitation patterns as the Roman granaries of North Africa were. A prolonged drought in these regions would not just cause local hunger, it would trigger global food shortages and geopolitical instability. Meanwhile, the increasing frequency and intensity of hurricanes, wildfires, and heat waves are a relentless stress test on our emergency services, our power grids, and our social cohesion, pushing our systems toward a breaking point. The climate scientist James Hansen once said we are the captains of our spaceship Earth, and that statement now holds a profound historical weight. We are not simply passengers on this planet, subject to its natural cycles. We have taken control of the engine room, and we are steering the entire ship into uncharted and dangerous waters. This places a responsibility on our generation that no pharaoh or emperor ever had to bear. So what, then, are the specific, actionable lessons we must learn from the Maya and the Romans? The Maya collapse teaches us the peril of rigidity, of a society whose leadership and ideology were tied to a single, unchangeable environmental expectation. When the rains failed, their entire political and religious system lost its legitimacy. The Roman example, by contrast, shows that even a golden age built on a favorable climate is temporary. Their eventual struggles came when a changing environment multiplied the stresses on an overstretched and inflexible system. For us, this means that resilience is not about building higher walls against the sea, but about creating agile, redundant, and decentralized systems for food, water, and energy. It means diversifying our global food sources so that a failure in one region does not lead to global famine. It means designing cities that can absorb floodwaters and withstand heat, rather than simply fighting against them. The past shows us that civilizations fall when they fail to adapt to the new world the climate creates. Our unique burden and our only hope is that we can see that new world coming and choose to adapt before it arrives. The most vital lesson from these fallen empires is not a secret but a choice. We can choose to learn from their failures. The Maya, locked into a single crop, saw their world wither when the rains failed. Their story is a stark warning against the dangers of a monolithic system, a warning that echoes in our own vast fields of genetically identical wheat and corn. True resilience in our food supply will come not from maximizing the yield of one super crop, but from diversifying our agricultural portfolio, supporting a wider variety of drought-resistant and regionally adapted plants. We must break our reliance on monoculture. Similarly, the Romans discovered that their magnificent, globe-spanning trade routes were a source of both strength and profound fragility. When the climate shifted and harvests faltered across the provinces, those long, complex supply chains snapped. The grain ships stopped coming, and the city that relied on them faced starvation. This ancient lesson translates directly to our modern world of just-in-time delivery and globalized commerce. Building local and regional food security, empowering communities to grow more of what they consume, is not a step backward. It is a strategic buffer against the global shocks that history assures us will come. And just as the Inca engineered their landscape to manage the Andes' scarce water with breathtaking terraces and canals, our survival in a world of increasing droughts and floods will depend on our own investment in water management. This means modernizing aging aqueducts and levees, but also reviving ancient wisdom like rainwater harvesting and restoring natural wetlands that act as sponges. Perhaps the most powerful parallel lies in our energy supply. For over a century, our global civilization has been powered by a single, dominant source: fossil fuels. This is the ultimate monoculture, an energy system that is destabilizing the very climate it depends on. Diversifying our energy grid with solar, wind, geothermal, and other renewables is the modern equivalent of the wise farmer who plants many different seeds. It is our best defense against the inevitable disruptions ahead. The societies that weathered the storms of history were not necessarily the strongest or the wealthiest, but the most adaptable. They were the ones who could change their farming practices, redesign their cities, and reform their governance to meet a new environmental reality. We possess an advantage that Akkadian emperors and Maya lords would have given anything for: the gift of foresight. We can see the storm on the horizon. We have the data, we know the patterns, and we are surrounded by the ruins of those who did not act in time. The final question is not about our knowledge, but our courage. Will we be the first civilization to read the warnings of the past and consciously choose a different path? History's grand cycle of stability and shock is not a prophecy of doom, but a map of our own crossroads. For thousands of years, civilizations have risen on a tide of favorable weather, building their monuments and armies during eras of predictable rains and warm summers. They consolidate their power, create vast bureaucracies, and reach a dazzling peak of cultural complexity, all underpinned by an environmental blessing they often took for granted. Then, inevitably, the climate shifts. A volcano erupts, the monsoons fail, or the temperature drops. This is the great test, the moment that separates the resilient from the fragile. The society that has built flexibility into its systems, that has diversified its food sources and created adaptable governance, can bend and survive. The one that is rigid, over-specialized, and locked into a single way of life will fracture. We are now living through the most profound climatic instability the world has ever seen, a shift of our own making. The test is here. The droughts, the fires, the superstorms, these are not distant warnings. They are the first questions on our civilization's final exam. But we are not the Maya staring helplessly at a dry sky, nor the Romans watching their African granaries wither without understanding why. We hold the answer key. We have decoded the ice cores and read the tree rings. We know precisely what is happening, what is causing it, and what the likely outcomes will be if we fail to act. This scientific foresight is our single greatest advantage over every empire that came before us. It grants us the power to see the cycle clearly and the responsibility to break it. We are the first generation that does not have to be victims of this ancient pattern. We can choose to learn, to adapt, and to build a society not for the climate of the past, but for the world we know is coming. The story of humanity and climate has always been one of dynamic interaction, a dance between human ambition and planetary forces. Now it is our turn to lead. From the dust of Akkad to the ice of Greenland, a single truth echoes across the centuries. Climate has never been a mere backdrop to the human story, but a lead actor on the stage of history. The power of pharaohs and the glory of Rome were not just products of human ambition, they were gifts from a stable and generous environment. We have walked through the ruins of empires starved by drought, shattered by volcanoes, and abandoned when the rains failed. The consistent thread is that a society's political and military might is only as robust as its environmental foundation. A kingdom cannot command loyalty from a starving populace, and a treasury means nothing when the fields produce no grain. This deep, intertwined relationship between a stable climate and stable power is the ultimate lesson written in the ruins. For us, these ancient stories are far more than academic curiosities. They are a stark and urgent warning. The climatic instability we are now creating is the same force that toppled the mighty, but with a profound and terrifying difference. The empires of the past were blindsided by changes they could not predict or comprehend. They looked at a failing harvest and saw the wrath of a god, not a shifting weather pattern. We have no such excuse. We possess the data, we understand the mechanisms, and we can see the consequences unfolding in real time. This knowledge is our greatest burden and our only hope. It transforms history from a simple record of the past into a call to conscious action. Let these fallen empires be our guide. Let their dust remind us that our own civilization, for all its technology and global reach, is not exempt from the planet's fundamental rules. I would be curious to hear which of these stories resonated most with you. Does the silent abandonment of the ancestral Puebloans strike a chord, or does the sudden shattering of the Minoan world feel more ominous? Share your reflections in the comments below. If this journey into the deep currents of history has changed your perspective, consider subscribing for more explorations into the hidden forces that have shaped our world.